Well, welcome everybody to FlightGlobal's fourth and final aviation sustainability webinar of 2023. Gosh, where's the year gone? Now, we're going to talk about SAF inevitably because of CAAF and everything, but the question is SAF up to the sustainability challenge? Now, my name is Mark Pilling. I'm a contributing editor at FlightGlobal and your moderator today. And we've been partnering on our webinars in 2023 with Pratt Whitney, a name, of course, familiar to all of you in the industry as a leading propulsion technology provider, and its unwavering commitment to aviation sustainability. Now, we welcome questions from our audience, so please add them and post them on the Q&A chat box only. The Q&A box, not the chat box, and we'll answer them as we go along and at the end. Now, today's webinar takes place after the milestone ICAO CAAF 3 Conference on Aviation and Alternative Fuels conference held in Dubai a couple of weeks ago. And I'm sure all of you are well aware of the last-minute efforts currently underway at COP28 in Dubai right now to achieve a global deal on climate change. And we'll talk about that in the context of CAAF as well. And we timed this very much as a follow-up with the experts to find out what the outcome of CAAF 3 is, where it's very much a focus on SAF and why it matters to our industry. And those people today, I'm very, very pleased to welcome Haldane Dodd, the Executive Director of the Air Transport Action Group. I'm very pleased as well to welcome Sean Bradshaw, Senior Fellow, Sustainable Propulsion at Pratt Whitney. We've got Nancy Young, the Chief Sustainability Officer of Gevo. We've got Jonathan Council, the Group Head of Sustainability of the International Airlines Group. Now, Nancy and Haldane were at CAAF and they were at COP, and Sean and Jonathan were avid online observers of the process, I know. Just for clarity, Jonathan is in Terminal 5 at Heathrow Airport waiting for his next mission. So, he's there. He promises that the champagne's on ice until he's finished the webinar. So anyway, let's kick off. Haldane, I'm going to start with you, please, because for some of us, CAAF 3, I had to keep looking it up to say what the acronym is. What is CAAF 3 and why is it important to the industry, please, Haldane?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mark, for having us on and very timely discussion here, coming just a couple of weeks after CAAF 3. And as we know, about 5 hours after COP28 was supposed to finish, it's not going to finish on time by any stretch. In fact, latest news I've got from some of the delegation already, or still on the ground in Dubai, is that 3 a.m. this morning, or tomorrow morning at least, might be the next plenary session where we might see some kind of outcome of COP28. Anyway, COP28 is another matter. We're here to talk about CAAF 3. CAAF 3 is the third conference on aviation and alternative fuels. The last two were held in 2009 and then 2017 in Mexico City. It's a grouping of countries. All the ICAO member states are invited to talk specifically about alternative energy and aviation. And of course, at the moment, the real focus there is on sustainable aviation fuels and lower carbon aviation fuels as well. And we can talk about the distinction there in a minute. But in the future, that will probably start bringing in some of the other alternative energies like hydrogen and electric as well. Key focus at the moment is on SAF. And it really, this year, followed up on the long-term goal that was achieved at the ICAO Assembly last year, net zero 2050. I think viewers will remember that the industry signed up to get to net zero 2050 in 2021. We pushed that forward with governments at the ICAO Assembly last year and got agreement from them as well. That's a very high-level overarching goal of how do we get to net zero within the industry in 2050. This agreement at CAAF 3, and we'll talk about the details of it, really tries to fill in some of the building blocks to get towards that net zero goal, specifically around the type of energy that we use.
And I think the distinction, the clarity here is that this is a state, it's a government guidelines, signals, etc. It's a government thing. It's not an industry thing. It's not lobbyists or anything like that. It's governments, right?
It's the 193 member states of ICAO meeting together. Not all of them turned up at CAAF 3, but a majority did, and really is the voice of governments, as you say. We are, as industry, we're observers to the process. We do have inputs, and we have, of course, a really important voice in the process, particularly when it comes to really pushing governments to do better. And we've got a fairly progressive stance as an industry. We know what we need to do to get to net zero. SAF is a huge part of that challenge, and so we had a really sort of hardline stance going into CAAF3 that we wanted to see some kind of outcome from the conference, not only the goal itself, which is the headline of any kind of conference like this, but also of the package of measures that help make up what's now known as the global framework. So those are all the things that can be put in place by ICAO to help implement the goal that was agreed.
Thank you, Haldane. Thank you for explaining that. Now, so tell us what was decided, and then we'll talk about was it what you wanted. But tell us what is this global framework? It all sounds a little bit nebulous, but I'm sure it's not.
That's true. So yeah, there are two main outcomes of CAAF3. The first is the global framework, and what that means is that the set of measures that ICAO can help implement to put in place the building blocks, if you like, that sit underneath any type of goal. So this includes things like capacity building, financing for new plants for SAF deployment around the world. It's technology transfer. It's also the policies that are needed by governments all over the world. And so these are the enabling factors to help SAF production start being scaled up. And that's really important. Actually, it's almost more important than just the goal itself, because of course, we've seen a lot of work being done in North America, in Europe in particular, on SAF deployment, and that's fantastic. But if we're going to have SAF deployed in every part of the world, we need to have SAF production in every part of the world as well. And there are a lot of countries out there that just don't have the capacity to be able to think about what their role can be in the SAF future story. And so ICAO, as a UN body, can help build those bridges and help make sure that they have the capacity that's needed and the financing that's needed to make that happen. So that package of measures is really, really important. And then the goal itself. So what came out—
Can I just ask, Haldane, can I just see if any of the other panelists want to chip in here on the framework, just how significant that is, perhaps, and what it means in your opinion? Jonathan?
Yeah, no, very happy to do that. And yeah, welcome, and thank you for the invitation. Yeah, apologies for the Christmas music in the background. I'll try and drown it out as much as I can. But yeah, no, it's really, we need SAF everywhere. We need global supply. And to do that, we need harmonization of standards. So I think the really important part of the ICAO framework is that it sort of points a direction, particularly around two key elements. One is sustainability standards. So currently we have different sustainability standards around the world, and that kind of creates a bit of friction in terms of a global market. So if we can harmonize those, that's really key. The other one is how we account for, the carbon emissions from sustainable aviation fuels. And so the book and claim processes, again, if we can drive towards a global standard on that, that is only going to help ramp up SAF supply on a global basis.
And are those included, Jonathan, in the framework as you read it?
Yes, yeah. So it's a broad-based framework, but those are two critical elements of it. Yeah.
Right. Thank you for that, Jonathan. Nancy or Sean, did you want to jump in with the point, or are you good for now? No, Sean. Yeah. Sean first, or Nancy first. Let's say Nancy. No, just got the pip on you then, Sean.
Yeah, no, I'm obviously very excited about the topic. So I think a couple of important things. When we say it's a conference, right, a lot of people think, oh, well, that's just a show and tell. But as Haldane and Jonathan said, this is a policy-making forum. And so it is significant that the 193 countries came up with this framework. For me, and as a SAF producer at Gevo, the importance of it is continuing to show that sort of stepwise progress and being able to facilitate SAF-related action around the world. And I would also add, as Haldane said, it's a country-specific forum. Having them make joint decisions is critical for that facilitation. But also, as he said, allowing industry to share our experiences. An example from us is that we are working very closely, even though we're a US company, we're working very closely with others around the world. For example, Praj in India and Indian Oil and some of the work that they're doing locally there. And being able to tell those stories and have the countries then think about how to better facilitate such relationships, we think is quite significant. So really pleased with the outcome, and want to continue to see more. And I know we're going to talk about the emissions goal in a bit, so I'll save my points on that.
Thank you, Nancy. Great. Sean, the floor's yours.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And thank you for having me once again. We are very pleased with the outcome. Right now, as you all know, SAF production globally is what, 0.2% of global demand. The framework establishes policies and measures, as Haldane articulated. It hopefully gets us to a global aspirational goal of about 5%. And in reality, the particular digit doesn't matter. It's the fact that we are all committed globally to increase SAF supply by an order of magnitude, which is what's required between now and 2030 in order to remain on track to the ultimate goal, which is to enabling the industry's commitment to net zero CO2. I think Nancy referred to the sand charts sort of in our pre-discussions. It is very clear that SAF is the critical enabler of achieving net zero CO2. That is, of course, in combination with advancements in efficient aircraft and engine technologies. But the key point here is there are qualified sustainable aviation fuel pathways today up to a particular blend limit, which we'll discuss. What as a technical matter, many of those issues have been solved for the approved or qualified blends. Really, much of the action over the next year, 5 years, has to be focused on unlocking supply domestically and globally around the world in order to maximize environmental performance subject to economic and other constraints. So, in short, excellent progress, heartened by the establishment of this framework and looking to exceed expectations, hopefully together as an aviation ecosystem on our decarbonization journey.
Great. Well said, Sean. Thank you, everybody. We're really in the room now. This is excellent. So we've talked about the framework. Wow. So we've got and it's very significant to have that, which you've explained. But in there are numbers. So Haldane, why don't you kick off and talk about the carbon intensity target, why that's different to an actual volume target, or maybe it doesn't even matter.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the global framework is one of the outcomes. The goal itself is the other, which was called the ICAO vision, and that comes from the last CAAF meeting. But this was updated with an actual number this time. In the lead up to CAAF 3, there was an awful lot of work done, both within the industry and sort of our analysis, but also within the ICAO technical analysis process as well. And they came up with, I think it was about 10 different options for what the metric of a goal could be. And it came together around carbon intensity being the most favored metric. So what the goal is that by 2030, we should have a 5% reduction in the average carbon intensity of the fuels that we use compared to today's straight fossil fuels. So at the moment, fossil fuels that we use in aviation are around 89 grams of CO2 per megajoule of energy. And the idea would be to bring that global average down by about 5% in 2030. This is important, and I'll let Nancy maybe go through the reasons why carbon intensity is a useful metric in that sense. But this is important because it is a global average. We're not expecting every single drop of fuel that we use to meet that goal, but we want the global average to meet it. This was really important because, of course, some countries in the world are more advanced in trying to put SAF into the system at the moment, and already we're using it in daily flights from a number of different airports. But some countries are going to need a bit of extra time to be able to build up production capacity to make SAF in their own countries. And particularly a lot of developing states probably won't be able to get SAF into the system by 2030. They might be a few years after that. And so the goal itself recognizes this. We don't expect to see this level of reduction in every single airport around the world, but it will be the global average. And that gives some countries extra time to come up to speed with what they need to on the SAF side of things.
And why is 2030 important? Again, I know we've had, you know, the 2030 gets used by quite a lot of airlines as a date for SAF usage, etc. But why is that important?
Well, of course, 2050 is our net zero goal. And actually going into CAF3, the industry put forward a metric to say we should have a 2050 goal as well. That didn't turn out. But 2030 is important because it sets a very early milestone on the road to 2050. And that's really important because we need to get moving on this pretty quickly. You know, 2050 always seems like so far away, but it's only 25 years away. And so in order to get the level of SAF that we need into the system by 2050, we're going to need to really push progress now. Having that number, 5% carbon intensity by 2030, helps really drive near-term investment, because we know that it takes about 5 years or so for a SAF plant to get up and running. In other words, we've got the next 18 months, maybe 2 years, to be able to finance the facilities that are needed to deliver SAF in 2030. So we don't have a lot of time for that, but it really puts a bit of fire under us to make sure that that is underway for 2030. And of course, we need that milestone to be able to get where we need to get to in 2050 anyway.
Right. Got it. Thank you, Haldane. Now, Nancy, carbon intensity. Oh my gosh, what is this concept? You know, we can all get a volume. Well, we've got, you know, 5% or whatever. Tell us why carbon intensity, why it's important, but also, you know, where does it take us?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, because what we really do need to focus on is exactly that, the intensity. And to break that down a little bit, you can talk about, we're going to have 100,000 gallons of sustainable aviation fuel or 100,000 liters of sustainable aviation fuel. But if you have not defined the emissions benefit of that fuel, in other words, the carbon intensity of that fuel, then you really can't show what your progress will be and is going to be. And if you think about their Air Transport Action Group Waypoint 2050 study or the ICAO long-term aspirational goal study, both of those show that you need to have, by 2050, 60% or more of the fuel needs to be provided by sustainable aviation fuel. But that doesn't tell you the whole story. It has to be fuel that has a very low carbon intensity to be able to actually meet the emissions goal. So having the ICAO states say, we're looking at a 5% emissions reduction in 2030 specific to sustainable aviation fuel and low carbon aviation fuel, is really kind of putting that target there. It is very modest. I think some of us would have liked to see a more aggressive target, but as Haldane said, it's a critical milestone for that ramp up towards 2050. Companies like ours, we know that the marketplace needs reduced carbon and a really good carbon intensity score. So our moving from the pilot facility that we've had for several years now, that's been supplying a number of aircraft and was critical in sort of certification of the alcohol to jet SAF pathway, we now are moving to our net zero 1 facility. And it's exactly what that name implies, that we're targeting a carbon intensity of net zero so that we can deliver real emissions reduction to our off-takers.
No, very good. Thank you, Nancy. Thanks for explaining that. Sean or Jonathan, did you want to add? Or Haldane, yes, please come in. And then Jonathan, please.
I just wanted to clarify one of the points. So Nancy mentioned before that the goal of 5% includes SAF and includes LCAF, or lower carbon aviation fuel. So what is LCAF? It is fossil fuel, but that in the production process of producing that fossil jet fuel, they've incorporated some efficiencies in the production process to reduce the overall life cycle of the fossil fuel that's produced. And this is really being pushed by a certain number of key oil producing states as a way of producing lower carbon aviation fuel. It is going to be part of a transition But I think that within the industry, we certainly believe that SAF is the long-term vision for how aviation is going to need to decarbonize, alongside some other technologies as well, of course. But LCAF is a key negotiating point from a certain number of countries, and so that was why it was included as part of the process. The difference between the carbon intensity of LCAF and SAF, so LCAF generally will be around about 10% lower carbon than straight fossil fuel or sort of traditional fossil fuel. It can be slightly higher than that. But of course, sustainable aviation fuel, it can range, but mostly at the moment, we're getting around about a 70% reduction. We're expecting that to be about 80% or so. And then, as Nancy was saying, it can go even higher than that to 100, or sometimes even a bit higher than that as well. So the real opportunity for reducing CO2 emissions comes from SAF rather than LCAF, but LCAF could play a transitional role in that.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that, Haldane. And LCAF is an intriguing possibility. And I understand none of it is actually produced at the moment anyway. So we'll see if it does become significant over the next few years. Jonathan, please jump in here, please.
Yeah, no, just a couple of additional points there. I mean, 2030, you mentioned 20. I mean, I think it's really critical for the aviation industry. I mean, we're a hard to decarbonize sector. We say we need everything, but fundamentally, SAF is going to play a key role for two reasons. It's the only thing that is going to enable us to reduce our emissions this decade, which I think as an industry, we have to demonstrate that. Secondly, it's the only viable solution for long-haul flying, which represents about 70% of aviation's emissions. For those two reasons, SAF is really important. Targets. In my world, it's all about getting investor confidence. We need to get these first-of-a-kind plants built, and to do that, you need investor confidence, and that's where targets come in. They send a very strong signal that we are committed as an industry. That's why in Europe we have a 6% mandate. By 2030, that's 3 million tons of SAF. In the UK, it's 10%. That's 1.2 million tons. The 5%, depending on the baseline you use, that could be anywhere between 15 million to 20 million tons of SAF, 150 to 200 plants. So again, it sends a global signal to investors that as an industry, we see this as a key part of our decarbonisation pathway.
And to add to Jonathan's
Sean,
point,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, to add to Jonathan's point, this is the now solution, right? Aircraft and aircraft subsystem technology development, those and product use are long cycle. 10, 20, 25 years between now and 2030, right? Demonstrated environmental performance will come from the proliferation and increased supply of sustainable aviation fuels that meet certain sustainability criteria defined by CORSIA and compatible with this new framework. So really the energy and the action and the focus should be on continued support through public-private partnerships of these efforts to scale supply domestically and globally, and then to sort of lean in and promote additional policies and measures over a longer time scale to continue to support sustainable aviation fuels.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Nancy, did you want to? Thank you, Sean. Great,
yeah.
Nicely said, Nancy.
Yeah, just bringing it back to one of your themes, Mark, on sustainability. Sean brought us back to that, and I think right on, right? So we're talking about carbon intensity. I hope that the audience knows that when we talk about carbon intensity, we're not forgetting the other greenhouse gas emissions. So when we do an assessment of our sustainable aviation fuel, it's a life cycle assessment from the beginning of the production for us, the feedstock, all the way through the processing, all the way to, in our case, all the way into the airplane and the combustion there. Critically, we put it in terms of carbon intensity, but we're looking at any greenhouse gas emissions impacts in there. So what you're really showing is true sustainability by taking those metrics and being able to compare across fuels for that. And I think we're all committed across the aviation industry and the fuel producer industry to making sure this is truly sustainable. So it's not only that intensity on emissions, but also the array of sustainability criteria that we adhere to.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy, for making that clear. Haldane?
Yeah, I just wanted to also make the points, 5% doesn't necessarily sound huge, but we can't underestimate the challenge of getting to that. As Jonathan mentioned, depending on the emissions reduction factor that's used, whether it's 80% SAF or not, then that could be about 23 million tons of SAF being delivered. Last year, we had about 200,000 tons of SAF delivered. So building up the capacity in the next 6 years or so is going to be a significant challenge. And we need to make sure that we are reaching out to the right audiences, which the CAAF3 result helps us do, to make the case for them to help support us in that process.
Yes, Haldane, thank you. And that's a nice segue into the sort of almost the next section. So we talked about the framework, we talked about the target, the goal. But is this, and the whole point is this is a signal, right? As Nancy was saying, amongst a bunch of, an array of signals, hopefully pointing in the right direction as far as the industry is concerned. But is this enough of a signal for investors to commit? I was listening to Haldane's excellent, ATAG's excellent conference on this, which is available on his website. I'm doing a promo for you there, Haldane. And Jane Hoope of ICAO, who's a leading part of the ICAO team delivering on CAAF3, she said at that event, bring us the money. This is the signal, now bring us the money. Is it enough, Haldane? Everybody, is it enough? And then we'll talk about what needs to happen if it isn't enough.
Well, I mean, by itself, it's not. It's an ICAO aspiration and vision. But what ICAO has done in the past, and certainly in other areas, including around CORSIA, around the long-term goal, and all the climate work that's happened at ICAO in the past 15 years, is it does send that signal. It sends the signal to governments, so that governments now need to start thinking about what they're going to do on a national policy front as well. It also can be something that we point to when we're talking to the finance community and to the energy industry to say, hey, this is a UN-backed goal now. We're going to need to make good on it. So by itself, no, but it sends a signal to other players within the policy space and also within the finance and energy space as well. And they will send the real official policy signals, if you like, when it comes to the law.
Yeah, okay, right, that's important. Jonathan, what's your thought?
Absolutely, just building on that, it's all about policy. So this is a signal for governments to develop the policy instruments to attract that finance, because this is not trivial. SAF plants are anywhere up to $1 billion a piece, and if we're going to meet that 5% target, 200 plants at $200 billion, you're going to need policy support for that. The US is doing great with the state incentives plus the Inflation Reduction Act. Here in Europe and the UK, we say that we need three things to attract finance: a demand signal. So in Europe and UK, we've done that through mandates. So in Europe, they're already in legislation, so that's a 6% by 2030. UK, we expect that early next year. We also have grant support. So the most risky phase of any project is during that development phase before financial close, commonly known as the Valley of Death. Terrible term, but it's it's a very good description. That's where you need grant support just to get you through that detailed engineering phase. The UK have done that. They've just announced 2 weeks ago the latest phase, the Advanced Fuel Fund, another £50 million to support 9 projects. But the final piece is you need incentives. Demand signal and grant support, nothing on its own. You need price incentives. So good to hear the UK government have committed to that through the energy bill. We're just concerned about the timing. It's going to take 2 years to get that in legislation. They have committed to 5 plants in construction by 2025. So we are working closely with them, something to try and bridge that, because I think we've really got to get this industry going and get those initial plants started in construction.
Yeah, that's great, Jonathan. Nancy, does that sort of resonate with you, those kind of 3 buckets, if you those 3 things that need to happen to get to financial close for the people who write the checks at the end of the day?
Yes, that and more, right? So with it, as Jonathan says, the demand signals. So we see that in various forms with airlines saying, we want this. They're, despite everybody seeing that they're making some money now, they're still in a hole from COVID. And so their balance sheets aren't all that great. We have great offtake agreements, but getting finance relative to those, it can be a challenge. So we need the incentives that Jonathan spoke about, the various buckets of those grants, tax incentives, and the like. Those need to be stable and they need to be long-term. So we were very excited, and I think the industry all pulled together, whether it was airlines, airports, labor, fuel producers, international entities to get the Inflation Reduction Act, SAF tax incentives approved. Big signal there. But we still don't have the guidance for implementing those, even though we're a year into those tax incentives. And that's expected soon. But those types of policy delays where we have that grand signal and then you have sort of got to wait for the administrative side to catch up, that can be a real challenge. So that's what we're focusing here on, getting our government to get that job done. Coming back to the signal that ICAO gives, though, as Haldane said, the stackability of these signals, the demand, various incentives, whether it's the Inflation Reduction Act, hopefully getting implemented here in the US for SAF, the mandates in the EU, the facilitation efforts that are going on under ICAO to further build up other countries and feedstock opportunities. Those types of things together are really critical. But we can't forget, we're still in a challenging financial situation. We had COVID. That's difficult for everybody. Then what has happened since then, as everybody knows, is high interest rates and inflation. And so those of us that are working to finalize our investment on our facilities really need that long-term policy signal to be able to help the investors have the confidence in what we're doing. On our side, we connect low-cost feedstock that is very sustainable, a technology that is very scalable, and the ability to deliver. And those are the types of things that investors are looking for, in addition to really that policy signal.
And Nancy, do they have that then? Is this actually there? Because I hear this all the time. We get investors need the confidence, and I heard Harry from the European Bank on the EU conference at the COP last year talking about a bankable project. Quite simple: enough investment and a good return at the end. Is that there yet with all of these stackable signals, or are we still missing something?
We need more. So, I mean, not to be greedy about it, but, basically whether, the discussions at the Conference of the Parties, COP28, CAAF 3, finance was the very, very big thing. We have gotten over the technology hurdles. We, at the very beginning, addressed demonstrating how SAF is completely safe. We have put together pieces of policy, including the CAAF 3 outcome. But we still need to bring the finance community along. And I think part of it has been getting the message out. But another part of it is for the finance community to see, not only do we have technology that's scalable and can be made cost effective, and there are winners and losers in that. We believe we're a winner in that, but they need to see that as well as the long-term incentives. One final example, in the United States, when we get those SAF tax credits from the IRA implemented, again, we're already a year late in that, they only gave us 5 years of it total incentives, whereas a lot of ground-based fuels got 10 years of incentives in the same piece of legislation. So that we need to extend those. And I was really pleased to see US officials at COP28 saying they recognize the need to extend the SAF tax credits to longer term. So we've got to get there.
Yes. Haldane, do jump in, please.
Yeah. I think what we've seen in the United States, certainly the discussions in Europe to probably a lesser extent as well, in terms of the support that we can receive as an industry for getting SAF production underway, is something we would like to see everywhere else in the world. But I think we need to be also just realistic in the fact that a lot of countries just don't have the ability to be able to support SAF supply and production in the same way as some of the developed world is. So that's one of the reasons why I think the work at ICAO is so important, to help bring in things like blended financing as a way of helping to support SAF production in countries all over the world, because they just don't have the ability to do it within their own budgetary systems. And that's really important because there is an opportunity here for us to build new energy, green energy systems in many different countries around the world. At the moment, about 90% of our fuel supply comes from 22 countries. We have the ability with sustainable aviation fuel, given the range of different feedstocks and pathways that can create SAF, to actually build that out into almost every country in the world, really. And a report that we had done for us suggests that potentially 14 million jobs could either be sustained or created through SAF production, meeting our net zero goal in the end. So this is a really important development opportunity for countries as well. And that's one of the reasons why we're spending a lot of time talking to multilateral development banks, places like the World Bank and the African Development Bank and so forth, about the role that they can play in helping to support that process as well.
No, well said. That's a really great point, Haldane. That sort of energy transition and countries having some independent, and wow, wouldn't that just be a phenomenal geopolitical transformation for the world? One of the things I'm interested in is to talk about, just to add on to this, is we always talk about the money and we talk about the investors. And I mean, investors are quite simple beasts at the end of the day. They look at a return over a certain amount of period on the capital they invest. It's not actually that complicated. Again, Harry from the EBRD was so super clear on this last week. But there is a group of people, a group of companies, perhaps, that we could talk about, or just, mention, are they stepping up fast enough here? And that's, of course, the oil majors, the people who are, invested in manufacturing, refining, and producing the oil today. That they have got a massive stake in this, role in this. Are they stepping up fast enough here, panelists? Because some simple changes, not say simple, nothing simple, but some changes here could make a big difference to investors as well, to other investors as well. What's the thought? Who wants to jump in?
I'll go first, because I think that I've got an opinion on this, and others have heard that before as well. The simple answer is no, they're not. There's a lot of talk from certainly some of the oil majors. There's quite a bit of advertising going on at airports around the world on what they're doing to try and produce green fuels. But I think if you look at it from an overall perspective, the traditional oil companies have not been doing nearly enough to help us in this transition. They've spent the last 100 years or so making an awful lot of money off aviation. We as an industry have got our pathway forward to 2050. We know where we need to go. We know the important role that SAF has to play in this. And I don't think that they're taking the transition seriously enough at the moment. Whether they are going to get on board with that in the future, hopefully signals like what we're seeing out of CAAF3, hopefully like we're going to see out of COP28 coming today, will send that signal to those oil companies as well. But in a year where they made record profits last year, $220 billion profit amongst 10 companies last year, one of them made $161 billion worth of profit last year, and yet the same year they decided that they were going to pull back on some of their 2030 climate commitments. That shows that they're not serious about this. If I was a CEO or a board member in one of these companies, I'd be looking to 20 years' time and saying, is my company going to have a future? If it is, then it's going to need to get into the space, not only in aviation with SAF, but in other sectors of the economy as well. So no, I don't think they're doing enough.
Thank you, Haldane. That's clear. Jonathan?
Yeah, no, and I'd agree with that. We've been working on SAF for the best part of 15 years, and the energy companies have been notably absent from this, and it's been the airline industry that's had to sort of step in, and we're ready to commit. If I think about IAG, we've committed $865 million in contractual commitments for SAF to help meet our 1 million tons by 2030. That said, one thing, there's the difference of opinions around mandates, but one thing mandates do, it forces people to the party, including the energy companies. You can't ignore mandates, so that's one positive for it. And we are starting to see some moves from some of the majors in Europe. They're looking at building SAF plants. It is 1G SAF, so that's fine. We need all SAF, 1G, 2G, 3G. What I'd like to see more of is 1G SAF it's proven, it's mature, we know it works, it's relatively low risk. What I'd like to see more is those energy companies with those very strong balance sheets really driving the 2G and 3G markets, because we're not going to be able to meet our ambitious 2050 targets with just 1G. We need those more advanced fuels.
I would jump in on that. So in my prior life, some of you will know that I worked for the airlines for many, many years. And in 2006, the US airlines banded together with the US airframe and engine manufacturers, our Federal Aviation Administration, and the airports here to create the Commercial Aviation Alternative Fuels Initiative, which is really intended to form, how do we do this? How do we go forward in SAF? And at that time, we did it. And to Haldane and Jonathan's point, the aviation industry said, we've got to do this ourselves. We are not seeing the oil companies stepping up. And so we've got to create the path forward. So we did that then and have continued to do it. I think we thought that the oil majors would come in after a few years, and they've kind of held largely back. There have been some investments. So you see companies like ours or LanzaJet or World Energy, others that have been Neste, that have been developed as sort of bespoke, let's do sustainable aviation fuel. That's a tremendous opportunity and commitment of investment because you're starting, with some exception, Neste has some historic assets, but you're starting from scratch at these new facilities with new feedstocks and technologies. So you're doing the research and development, you're doing the work to demonstrate it. And that's a big investment. And so, of course, we would like the oil majors to come in and do their part, but we also have to remember that they have, as Haldane said, they have tremendous budgets and other things. Why aren't they doing that? So when we think about it in terms of policy, those that have really pioneered this space need to continue to have the support. And yes, the oil majors should come in, but we should probably temper the policy and incentives relative to their ability to pay, among other things.
Mm. And just to add, we do not have a representative from one of the oil majors on the call. So, you know, in one sense, apologise for that. But I do know that if they were on the call, they would be telling us how much they are spending and what they're doing, and that is quite well documented. But I think the point here is, from an industry point of view, from a transport industry point of view, I think the message is quite clear. We've got a couple of questions coming in before we go on to sort of the wrap-up phase. Larry Gray talks about how to measure whether or not we get to the goal, say the 5%, etc. And an anonymous attendee sort of talked about whose responsibility is it to we achieve this goal. Who wants to sort of chime in about, hey, how do we measure, and whose responsibility is it to sort of check we get there?
Larry Gray from Pratt and
Nancy,
Whitney.
do you want to go?
Yeah, Larry Gray from Pratt and Whitney needs to do the measuring. No, I think it's a great question. The ICAO has, as you all, the panelists all know, Committee on Aviation Environmental Protection. And the Committee on Aviation Environmental Protection is comprised of experts from around the world, from states and industry as well. And it has mechanisms to do the analysis. I think what is going to be critical is how do we do the reporting mechanisms in a reasonable way to collect the data that will demonstrate that progress. So I think it's a great question, and we really need to be focused on showing that, so that, as Haldane said, when we get to 2030, that milestone is not only reached, hopefully exceeded, and creates that trajectory to do more.
Okay, great. Another question here from one of our former industry colleagues, Chris Lyle, ex of ICAO, very much embedded in this. He says, does the inclusion of LCAF in the reduction target not undermine the development of SAF? He says, in theory, oil-producing states could develop and export sufficient LCAF worldwide to meet the 5% target in the absence of using any SAF at all. Haldane, what's your sort of thought to that?
Show us the LCAF and we might include it, but at the moment there's none being produced. And I think if you look at the global average, that will be the result of our 2030 goal, and particularly if we look out to 2050, then LCAF is going to be a relatively small part of that puzzle anyway. We know that it only reduces by around 10%, maybe slightly higher. But if we can completely replace our fossil fuel supply, traditional fossil fuel supply, with LCAF, then we've reduced emissions by 10%. That's great. We should do it. At the moment, we're not seeing any of it being delivered. And I don't know of any production facilities that are in the pipeline at the moment anyway. The reality is this is going to be through SAF for the most part.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Jonathan first, then you, Nancy.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think LCAF has a relatively small role to play in the transition, and essentially our carbon pricing instruments will ensure this. We want the SAF that produces the greatest carbon reduction, and all our carbon pricing instruments should incentivize the most sustainable fuel, and that's what they're going to do. So fundamentally, the main role is going to be SAF, and the closer we can get to third generation SAF, the quicker these power to liquids, where you're taking carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and mixing it with green hydrogen, getting 100% sustainable fuels. The quicker we can get there, the better.
Yeah, and I'd say right on. Those guys nailed it. And I would just add, and since we're in the waning hours of COP28, one of the remaining issues is whether the countries will speak to phasing down fossil fuels. And I think that would be an incredible signal for the world that there is that will to phase them down. It seems dubious whether they'll achieve that kind of language in the final agreement, but certainly that's the way the aviation industry and the SAF producers look at it.
Yes, okay, thank you, Nancy. There's another question from Bernard Lavelle here, who's talking about this, he's trying to get his head around, I think, the seismic change needed. And he says, in his view, governments need to take the lead, given the costs involved and the implications for supplying SAF. Does CAAF 3 and the signals that it's giving, is this where governments are taking the lead, perhaps on the policy bits as well, the mandates and stuff? Are governments doing enough in here? Who wants to go?
Well, maybe if I can just, I'd say if you're doing a scorecard, I'd say with the caveats that Nancy mentioned around, we need longevity of that policy support, but the Inflation Reduction Act, that's we see that as the lead, and that's where most of the capital's going. EU doing pretty good. They've got the mandates, they've got the SAF allowances, they've got the innovation fund. So I think there's pretty good progress taking place in the EU. I'd say UK, good progress, but we just need to get it into legislation. Currently we don't have anything in legislation. We need that mandate. We need that price stability mechanism. Grant funding is great, but you're not going to get any plants built until you get that legislation. And then what CAAF does is sending a signal to the rest of the world. And there are now good examples of these are the sorts of policy frameworks that are going to attract the capital to get plants built. So I think we're on the cusp of, and I think we're all going well, we can genuinely hit that sort of 20 million tons of SAF by 2030.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I can add to that, Mark, I think in the United States, the US IRA is a good start. I think Nancy mentioned that additional policy support that builds on the IRA and extends the period of performance of the program is warranted given the long cycle times required to develop SAF facilities. I think that's straight on. But again, you've got to walk before running, progress over perfection. I think the combination of incentives and credits in the US IRA, as well as other programs through the FAA, to provide additional support for some SAF infrastructure development and some technology development for future aircraft technologies compatible with advanced second, third, fourth generation sustainable aviation fuels is the right set of incentives and sends the right signals. But again, it's just the beginning. More is required, and we've got to keep pressing ahead.
Yeah, I want to add to what Sean said, because I've seen some weird press recently saying the U.S. has fallen behind in SAF. With due respect, I think the U.S. has been leading since starting the Commercial Aviation Alternative Fuels Initiative in 2006 with industry here, and having programs, as Sean is mentioning. We have an Ascent program. We have multiple other programs that have really helped build things up. Our Federal Aviation Administration, working with industry, has pioneered the certification process for approving sustainable aviation fuels as safe and equivalent to traditional jet fuel and other things. So I think. And the U.S. has done a lot of outreach with other countries. So I give them an applause on that. At the same time, as I said before, we need more, and that longer term policy signal with a longer term SAF, tax incentives would be a huge help.
Thank you, Nancy. Haldane, did you want to chip in?
Yeah, I think, we often get asked, well, this hasn't really been happening very fast. It's been taking a long time to get where we are now with SAF. And, we've been working on it since, 2008 was the first commercial aircraft flying on SAF out of Heathrow. That was a sort of demonstration flight. It's taken you a long time since then. But in reality, we've spent 10 of those years at least building the foundations for where we need to go now. We've gone through the safety process in terms of certification of different types of feedstock, all the work that needed to go into building up the capacity within the developed economies around the world. And Nancy outlined the CAAF process within the US, taking the heavy lifting, if you like, the early action that needed to be taken when it came to SAF development. We're now in a position we can start moving this forward and accelerating this much faster than we have in the last decade or decade and a half. So all that foundation has really built the solid base for where we move now. We've got about 40 countries in the world that have got SAF policies either in place or under development within their governments. Hopefully CAAF 3 will help spur even more of those discussions in countries all over the world as well. And so we're in this place now where that hopefully provides the momentum that's needed to really push SAF development off even further than where we are at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Haldane. Thanks for bringing that through. One of the things that I wanted to just ask you guys, and it's sort of asked in one of the questions, is obviously we're focusing on SAF. The industry is very much focused on SAF through CAAF 3, etc. Some of the NGOs would argue, well, that's, this is also about alternative fuels. So, don't forget, as it were, don't forget that impetus around, hydrogen or hybrid or electric, etc. What would you say to that? Are we sort of a bit too obsessed with SAF? Shouldn't we sort of be looking, almost being as obsessed as we were 10 years ago with SAF, with the alternative fuel options?
Yeah, Mark.
Sean first, and then maybe Jonathan.
Yeah, no, a SAF obsession is warranted. That is the key lever to achieve net zero by 2050. Hydrogen plays an important role as a key feedstock. Haldane alluded to it in certain low carbon aviation fuels, green hydrogen. Green hydrogen can play a role in enabling some decarbonization of the first generation SAFs. And they're the absolute critical feedstock amongst another feedstock, CO2, for third and fourth generation fuels, electricity derived sustainable aviation fuels that'll be implemented well in the future. So a hydrogen infrastructure companion to a renewable electricity infrastructure domestically and globally, in combination with supporting current efforts to scale first generation sustainable aviation fuels, is the right focus. Now, advanced aircraft technologies are critical for bending the demand curve for aviation fuel energy globally, right? And the aviation companies, the OEMs, are laser focused on investing and developing such technologies, particularly advanced propulsion technologies that go beyond the current iterations of the jet engine to deliver step changes in performance, all compatible with, yes, sustainable aviation fuels. And technologists, of course, are leaning forward to evaluating the possibility of compatibility of hydrogen as an aviation fuel. But I sort of want to be clear on the emphasis. The emphasis should continue to be on sustainable aviation fuels from first generation up through e-fuels, and recognizing the need for public-private partnerships, frankly, to invest in a hydrogen infrastructure to supply those fuels, as well as infrastructure for renewable electricity, both for aviation and for sectors outside of the aviation industry.
No, thank you, Sean. That's a great, you've been very clear. Thank you for answering my question so clearly. Jonathan's wants to add, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely support that priority SAF. We think 70% of our fuels could be SAF by 2050. So it is the key. But we think that there is an opportunity for these disruptive technologies. We're an investor in Zero Avia, so full disclosure hydrogen fuel cell company. But we think they will take longer, and they're only really solutions for short haul. So our latest roadmap, just to give a sort of data reference, is we think first of those plants will be in commercial service mid-2030s, but they won't start to have a material impact for another 10 years. So, you know, when you start to get sub-fleets of these aircraft. So in our roadmap to 2050, we think those disruptive technologies will reduce our emissions by between 5 and 10%. So they have a role to play, but the priority is SAF.
Right, thank you.
Haldane,
yes.
Just to add on to that, I think when it comes to the focus on what we need to be sending in terms of a message now outside the industry, the reason that we have a quite right focus on SAF is that we're going to need so many other parts of the global economy to help us with that process. It's going to take government policy, it's going to take the finance community and the energy industry to come on board with those things. And that is why it's a core message for ours right now, is to bring them on board. Once we've got that rolling, once we've got to that 5% in 2030 goal, hopefully it creates a life of its own, and we can start focusing on other more aviation specific things. Because at the moment, actually, we're talking about energy rather than aviation technology, if you like. And the only reason we're doing that is because our traditional energy companies haven't been doing it so far. So at some point, we'd probably like to just go back to flying planes and doing the aviation technology stuff and make sure the energy system is working by itself.
Understood, Haldane. But the point here is that to do that as a business, to do it in a sustainable way, in a decarbonized way, the industry has to do this, go down this, through this, you know, process, if you like, or just this commitment. Now, I just want to sort of let's go to the wrap up now, everybody, because Haldane, I wanted you to start, please, because one of the things, what was the clear big message, which I want you to amplify here, that you said at your ATAG meeting last week about the phase out of fossil fuels?
Yeah, and you know, this is the core point of discussion right now at COP. It's the thing that's keeping the COP from being concluded, and that's the question of a phase out of fossil fuels. It was in the draft negotiating text a few days ago. It's been taken out since. They're talking about a phase down and making the language a lot more soft. But I think anybody who has been following the climate change process more broadly, but also our own climate change process within aviation, knows that we are going to need to look at a phase out of fossil fuels. It's inevitable if we're going to meet the
by
Paris
2050.
By 2050 or thereabouts, but yeah, in around about that time frame.
By 2050, don't give me all thereabouts, Haldane. That's no good.
But yes, no, I mean that is key, and so we can need to start preparing for that now. In fact, we should have been preparing for it for the last 40 years. But that is certainly the mindset that we need to be thinking about.
Sure, thank you. And I'm going to give everybody a final word here now, because it's Christmas and I'm the Christmas elf as far as that's concerned. Is, you know, 2050 sounds a long way away. It is a long way away, closer than we think, but still. So let's bring it back to 2024 from your point of view, and it can be very personal. It can be about your business. You can promote your business. What do you want to see happen on the sustainability front in 2024, maybe by the end of the year, in the next 12 months? Sean or Jonathan, who wants to kick off? Sean.
Yeah, well, so first, in the world of aviation, 2050 is staring us in the face, given the long life cycle of our products. But what I'd like to see in 2024 are three things. One, right, it looks like we're projected to increase.
I gave you one thing, Sean. You're going to go three?
Three. I have many ideas, but hit 1% of demand in SAF supply by in 2024. That's optimistic. Recent publication showing we're on track for about 0.5%. But let's overperform. Second, over on the ASTM side, on technical standards, the publication of that first technical standard for 100% sustainable aviation fuels. That'll be maybe a year or two ahead of schedule. But on the engineering and technology side, that'll send the right signal to the OEMs. And then third, continued testing of SAFs on the ground and in the air to evaluate SAF benefits, particularly with regard to condensation trails and their warming effects.
Yes. Okay. Well said, Sean. Okay. You, Jonathan, can you do it? Can you have 1 point?
Yeah, I can do it. Well, it's a much simpler ask, really. Just policy. I want a legislation mandating legislation next year, along with that price stability. And my dream is so I can visit those 5 construction sites in the UK in 2025.
Oh, very good. That's nice. Thank you. Well, that kind of was 2. So Sean's had 2. Sean's had 3. Jonathan's had 2. Nancy, how many do you need?
I'll do the one quickly, which that we would like to see the guidance come out. I'm getting all choked up on the Inflation Reduction Act.
It's emotional. It's emotional stuff, Nancy.
Yeah, we would like that to come out and include the GREET model. So which would put transportation fuels on a carbon intensity basis, that metric that we need, and it would be a common metric to be able to implement that guidance. Choked up.
Nancy, thank you. Very good. We won't ask you to talk anymore unless you have that champagne that Jonathan's going to bring us around. Haldane, I think the final word's going to go to you. In terms of the panelists.
Listen, I take all their Christmas wishes. Although, to be honest, where Jonathan's heading right now, I'd like to sort of figure out where that is. But my one thing is I'd like to see commitments to a SAF plant in a developing economy, because I think that's going to send a massive signal to those countries that they can be part of the story as well.
No, well said, Haldane. Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for your great contributions. It got so emotional at the end there that Nancy lost her voice there. So, but that's I think we've all got hopefully we've all got a better understanding about the outcome of CAAF 3. Thank you so much, everybody. We've all got hopefully a better understanding of the decarbonisation journey, the journey towards SAF and other alternative fuels, etc., and the policies and the investor signals and the requests to the other parts of the industry to really come on board. I think it's been very, very clear. Thank you, Haldane, Sean, Nancy, Jonathan, so much for your participation. It is massively appreciated. Thank you to our sponsor, Pratt Whitney, as well. That's been, again, massively appreciated. And your contributions this year have been great. This webinar will be on demand shortly after this to watch at your leisure. Do watch Haldane's one as well, because I've been looking at some of those, and some great. Nancy's on there, Haldane's on there as well. But thank you, everybody. From me, I wish you all a good day, a good festive season, whatever you're doing in it, in that. Until FlightGlobal's 2024 webinar program is announced. We'll see what the new year brings, everybody, on the sustainability front. Keep it green, right? Goodbye. Thank you very, very much.
Absolutely. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.